Hello, Comp 1. Got enough ice to stand on here, but I don't think there's enough ice to fish on yet. Have to wait a couple weeks. I have not been secretive about the fact that I really enjoy teaching at Central Lakes College. And among the things that I enjoy up there are my colleagues. There are some very serious educators at Central Lakes College, and you should be proud to attend it. Even you online students, you should be very proud to be part of the long tradition of Central Lakes College, which goes back to the 1930s. You know, last year, about this time, I was having a conversation with one of the teachers at Central Lakes who teaches photography. And as we were having a sandwich together during a workshop, he reminded me of a famous photographer named Jim Brandenburg. You might know his story. He was taking photos all the time for National Geographic, one after another. And he realized he was just taking so many photographs that it didn't matter anymore. So what he did was he went up north to northern Minnesota, Ely if memory serves, and he told himself that he was going to go for a 90-day period and only take one photograph per day. In the North Woods, he decided that he would allow himself one photograph per day, no more. And a very famous photography book came out of that project. And we have reason to be proud of him, to be proud of Jim Brandenburg. Now, my topic today is not photography. My topic today, and my hope, is to talk about paragraphing just a little bit. It's kind of late in the course, and we've had a couple of videos devoted to the idea of making sentences. But I'd like to, before you write this next paper as we get near the end, have an idea or two about what we're doing when we craft paragraphs, when we write them. I'm going to be relying on some training that I got from Francis Christensen. I'm going to be relying on some training from Aristotle and some common sense stuff that I've observed in all my years of teaching English. But first, before we get going there, I'd like to show you a very beautiful poem that actually is a prose poem. It has quite a story behind it. I'm tearing up here in this wind a little bit. And the poet is a man named Robert Haas. Now what I'd like to do is read the poem to you and then tell you an extraordinary story about the poem. If you pay attention, you will understand to some degree how literature works, how it's created. Artists, writers live through things, and they turn what they live through into art. And here's the poem. It's a little bit of a rough one. Robert Haas is a very sweet man, but he's capable of writing some terrifying poetry. Here's the poem. It's called A Story About the Body. The young composer, working that summer at an artist colony, had watched her for a week. She was Japanese, a painter, almost 60, and he thought he was in love with her. He loved her work, and her work was like the way she moved her body, used her hands, looked at him directly when she made amused or considered answers to his questions. One night, walking back from a concert, they came to her door, and she turned to him and said, "I think you would like to have me. I would like that too, but I must tell you, I've had a double mastectomy." And when he didn't understand, "I've lost both my breasts." The radiance that he had carried around in his belly and chest cavity, like music, withered very quickly, and he made himself look at her when he said, "I'm sorry. I don't think I could." He walked back to his own cabin through the pines, and in the morning, he found a small blue bowl on the porch outside his door. It looked to be full of rose petals, but he found when he picked it up that the rose petals were on top. The rest of the bowl, she must have swept them from the corners of her studio, was full of dead bees. Now that poem is not for the faint of heart, and I can't tell you the entire story behind the poem, but you deserve one good story about poetry, even though it's short on time always in these online lessons. Here's the deal. About 5 years ago, Robert Haas came to my classroom, my old classroom anyway, in my old teaching life. And before he came, I wanted to ask him whether or not this poem happened. Is this true? It seems real. And I had a friend, a colleague of mine, and I told him before Haas came, I'm going to ask Robert Haas if this happened. I'm going to ask him if this really happened. My friend said, "Don't ask him that. That's a stupid question. Ask him your own question." Well, when Haas came to my room, my students who had met him the night before loved him so much that they applauded the minute he hit the door. He came in and he just threw out his arms, this generous, sweet, great-hearted man, and he said, "Let's not read any poetry today. Let's just talk. Do you have any questions?" I raised my hand and I said, "Robert Haas, this feels like the most amateurish question I could ask you. I've got to know. The poem, A Story About the Body."
It's okay.
The ice just cracked a little there. We'll edit that part out. I said, "Mr. Haas, did a story about the body, did that really happen? Did that occur? I've got to know." And he came over and shook my hand and he said, "Jeff, that's the greatest question in the world to ask a writer. The greatest question in the world is to ask them if something that they've written, a poem or a story or a novel about, came out of the real, or was it purely imagined?" This is what he told me. He told me that there was a period of his life where he decided that he would only write one paragraph per day, just one. He would get to the evening, and when the time came, he would take out a piece of paper and craft one single paragraph about the most important thing that he had experienced that day. This would be a great writing activity for you, to show that kind of restraint, you know. Stop texting, stop emailing, stop calling people, and then when you get to the end of the day, just craft one clear paragraph. Try it for a week. I've asked students to do it before. If you did it at the end of the year, you'd have 365 paragraphs. Now you're going to hear the clacking of my dog on the dock here. Haas told me that he went to lunch with a friend of his one day who had an artist friend who had lived through this. And Haas went home and wrote this paragraph down and sent it to another poet that's been in my school, Robert Pinsky, an American poet laureate. Pinsky took a look at that paragraph, this prose poem, A Story About the Body. He loved it so much, he said, "I want to put that in my magazine." Haas said, "That's great, it's yours." About 6 months later, the poem came out. And about 2 weeks after that, Haas got an angry letter from a woman from Chicago who wrote him and said, "You know what? I don't know how you heard that story about my artist friend and the blue bowl and the bees and so forth, but I thank God in heaven that she died in hospital before you could humiliate her with that poem." Haas felt terrible. He wrote her back and said, "You know what? I wrote that to honor your friend. I heard the story third hand, but I certainly didn't write it to hurt her feelings or degrade her." Not long after that, Haas got another letter from the woman in Chicago. And this time the letter was in a little package. He took out the letter and the woman apologized. She said, "You know what, I believe you. I'm sorry I wrote that letter to you. I'm lonesome for my friend. I'm wild with grief." Also in the box was a little blue ceramic bowl because the woman in Chicago was a ceramist. The story's not quite over. Haas told my students, now floating around my room. He said, "A little while after that, I was reading in Texas, the University of Austin, the University of Dallas, and there was a younger poet there at both readings. And at the end of the second reading at the University of Austin, that poet stood in the book signing line, got to the front and said, 'What do you have against me? What do you have against me?' I said, 'What are you talking about?' And the man said, 'I have been to 2 readings of yours in a row now in Texas, and you have taken a story about the body and just rubbed it right in my face.' And what could Haas do but look up from the table and ask, 'Are you the poet in this poem?' The guy said that he was. That's how literature worked, and maybe you'll think about that a little bit. Now, regarding paragraphs, a paragraph is described by one thinker that I know of as a kind of meta-sentence. It has a lot of the characteristics of a regular sentence. And in the same way that you're going to have to craft a bunch of sentences to end up with an essay, you're going to have to, like in this brief critical review essay, accumulate somewhere between 5 and 7 paragraphs. A paragraph for me, as I learned from Francis Christensen, is a sequence of structurally related sentences. You head out with some kind of topic sentence, and then you've got sentences that are either coordinate with that main idea of the paragraph or subordinate to it. If you write a sentence in a paragraph that does not have a thematic connection to that topic sentence, which is at the top of the sequence, that's what begins a paragraph, that first topic sentence, that's the sequence beginner. If you craft a sentence that doesn't have anything to do with that topic sentence, your sentence has lost its way, lost its mooring, so to speak. And you're probably going to have troubles with a basic composition concept called unity, coherence. When you write this paper, go back and look at the paragraphs, and do this with all the essays that you write at Central Lakes College or elsewhere, and ask yourself, do the sentences in this paragraph cohere? Do they tally with the theme, the umbrella-like theme, so to speak, of each sentence? Aristotle allows for several types of introductions. Keep that in mind as you write this too. You might set up an inquisitive introduction where you ask a question and then the paper goes on to resolve it. You might start a paper with a paradoxical introduction where you create the idea that, hey, there's something incongruent or weird about what I'm going to talk about, but don't worry, this essay will resolve that incongruency. You might have a straightforward informative paragraph, which is the least interesting of all, where you say, here's my topic, I'm going to write about it. You also might have a narrative introduction. I love these. I can't start a class without telling some kind of story. Trick is, though, let it go. You've got to let that narrative go after the first paragraph and start writing the essay. And it's only a way to get going. You can't complete it. The last one of all is preparatory, where you tell your readers that there's something either deficient about you, about your topic, but hang on to your hats, we're going to make it. And it's going to come out clear for you. Regarding the concluding paragraph, I've just got one piece of advice. Don't repeat what you just told me. Don't reiterate what you just told me. I just told a bunch of Johnnies and Bennies in my class down here, for instance, I forbid you to write a concluding paragraph that restates the thesis. Let it go. You beat that to death in high school. Do something else. Anything but. I know that's fuzzy advice, but even as an unmedicated ADHD learner and reader, I don't need to be told what I just read 10 minutes before. Good luck with these paragraphs in this paper and the other ones that you write.